Marcus Rodriguez had always known his life would be glamorous. That's why he spent his Tuesday morning elbow-deep in an alien waste disposal unit, wondering if his engineering degree had come with a money-back guarantee. The smell was, let's just say it wasn't roses, and leave it at that. "Janet, remind me again why I took this job," Mac muttered, wrestling with a particularly stubborn biomass filter. "Because you needed the money, Marcus." "Also, you were drunk when you signed the contract," replied the station's AI in her perpetually cheerful voice. Janet stood for just another neurotic electronic thinker, which pretty much summed up Mac's relationship with technology. Prometheus VI was humanity's latest attempt at deep space mining, a massive station orbiting a resource-rich asteroid belt. It housed 300 beings from 12 different species, all united by their common goal of extracting valuable minerals and their shared hatred of the cafeteria food. Mac's job description was officially maintenance engineer, but his actual duties ranged from fixing broken air recyclers to unclogging alien toilets. Today's adventure involved the waste management system, which had developed what Mac could only describe as indigestion. "Hey Mac, you drowning down there?" called a familiar voice from above. 6 purple arms appeared over the edge of the maintenance shaft, followed by the slug-like head of Gorvek, Mac's unlikely best friend on the station. "Just living the dream, Gorv," Mac replied, finally freeing the clogged filter. "Nothing says successful career like fixing alien plumbing." Gorvek chuckled, a sound like bubbles popping in thick syrup. "At least you don't have to process what comes out of said plumbing. My species' enhanced sense of smell is both a blessing and a curse." Mac climbed out of the shaft, wiping his hands on his coveralls. Gorvek worked in waste management, which made him the perfect friend for someone who spent his days fixing the systems that Gorvek's department relied on. They'd bonded over their shared position at the bottom of the station's social hierarchy and their mutual appreciation for human sarcasm. "Janet, what's next on my incredibly exciting agenda?" Mac asked, already dreading the answer. "Routine maintenance on the atmospheric processors in Section C7. Also, Marcus, I'm detecting some unusual solar activity. You might want to." Janet's voice cut off, replaced by the station's emergency klaxon. The sound made Mac's teeth ache and sent Gorvek's eye stalks retracting in alarm. "Attention all personnel," came the voice of Commander Phillips over the intercom. "We have a massive solar flare incoming. Estimated time to impact, 47 minutes. All personnel report to evacuation pods immediately." "This is not a drill." Mac and Gorvek exchanged glances. "Well, that's new," Mac said. "Usually my Tuesday disasters are limited to exploding toilets." The corridors filled with beings of all shapes and sizes, all moving with the practiced efficiency of people who drilled for this exact scenario. Mac started to follow, then stopped. "Wait, Section C7. That's where the atmospheric processors are." "So?" Gorvek asked, already moving toward the evacuation route. "So if those processors get fried by the solar flare, they'll start pumping out some seriously toxic stuff. The emergency systems will activate, but they haven't been properly maintained," Gorvek finished, understanding dawning in his large eyes. "Because the station's been cutting corners on safety inspections." Mac nodded grimly. "I need to get down there and shut them down manually. Go get on an evacuation pod." "I'm coming with you," Gorvek said firmly. "No, you're not. Your species can't handle the radiation exposure if something goes wrong. And humans can? Better than you can. Go, Gorv, I'll be fine." Mac was already running towards Section C7, his footsteps echoing in the increasingly empty corridors. He didn't see Gorvek's 6 arms droop with worry, or hear him mutter something about stubborn humans in his native tongue. Mac reached Section C7 just as the solar flare hit. The lights flickered, died, then came back on emergency power, bathing everything in an ominous red glow. The atmospheric processors, rather than shutting down as they should have, began emitting a low, threatening hum. "Well, this is just fantastic," Mac muttered, pulling out his diagnostic tablet. The readings made his blood run cold. The processors weren't just malfunctioning, they were actively converting the station's atmosphere into something that would make battery acid look like a health drink. Janet, what's our situation? Mac called out, but only static answered. The AI was either offline or too busy screaming electronically to respond. Mac worked frantically to shut down the processors manually, his hands flying over control panels that sparked ominously with each touch. The radiation detector on his belt began clicking like an angry insect, the sound growing faster by the minute. After 20 minutes of swearing, sweating, and praying to whatever gods protected maintenance engineers, Mac finally managed to force the processors into emergency shutdown. The humming stopped, but the damage was done. The air around him shimmered with toxic fumes, and his radiation detector was now clicking fast enough to sound like applause. Mac glanced at the readout and felt his stomach drop. The numbers were way too high. At these levels, he had maybe 12 hours before his organs started shutting down. Less if he kept moving around and breathing hard. Perfect. Just perfect. I survived the solar flare just in time to die of radiation poisoning. My mother's going to be so disappointed. That's when he heard a faint tapping sound coming from the collapsed section near the main corridor. Mac followed the sound, his heart sinking as he recognized the rhythm. It was Gorvek's species equivalent of knocking, a pattern they used to signal distress. Mac found his friend trapped under a fallen beam, his purple skin already turning an unhealthy shade of gray. One of Gorvek's 6 arms was bent at an impossible angle, and there was a nasty gash across his forehead that leaked silver blood. Gorv, what the hell are you doing down here? I told you to evacuate. I couldn't leave you, Gorvek wheezed, his voice barely above a whisper. My species values friendship above personal safety. It's a cultural thing. Mac knelt beside his friend, trying to lift the beam. It was wedged tight, and Mac's strength was already starting to fade as the radiation worked its way through his system. How bad is it? Mac asked, running his hands over Gorvek's injuries. Bad. My species, we need specialized treatment for injuries like this. The medical bay has a xenobiology unit that can synthesize the right compounds, but the medical bay is 11 miles away, through corridors that are now filled with acid rain and toxic fumes. Mac, just go. Save yourself. You'll be what? Fine? Gorv, you're literally turning gray. That's not your species' version of a healthy glow. Mac looked around the collapsed section, his engineer's mind already working on the problem. The beam was too heavy to lift, but he could probably create enough leverage to pull Gorvek out. The real problem was going to be getting him to the medical bay. Okay, new plan. I'm going to get you out of here, and then I'm going to carry you to the medical bay. Mac, that's impossible. You're already showing signs of radiation poisoning, and the station's atmosphere is toxic. You'll die before you make it halfway. Maybe. But here's the thing about humans. Gorv, we're too stupid to know when something's impossible. It's our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. Mac found a pipe that he could use as a lever, wedged it under the beam, and put all his weight on it. The beam shifted just enough for Gorvek to drag himself free, 6 arms working in painful coordination. Can you move? Mac asked. Not really. My locomotion system is damaged. Then I guess I'm carrying you. This is definitely not in my job description. Mac spent the next hour creating the most improvised stretcher in Galactic history. He used maintenance panels for the base, emergency cables for straps, and his own jacket as padding. The result looked like something a demented Boy Scout might build, but it would have to do. I want you to know, Mac said, strapping Gorvek to the stretcher, that I'm billing overtime for this. Hazard pay, too. Actually, I'm probably going to need a whole new pay grade. Heroic idiot has got to be worth more than maintenance engineer. Mac, you don't have to. Gorv, we've been through this. I'm not leaving you here to die while I go off and have my organs shut down in a more comfortable location. We're both getting out of this, or we're both becoming very artistic stains on the station's walls. Mac had fashioned breathing masks from air filters and sealed them as best he could with maintenance tape. The acid rain was already starting to fall in the corridors, droplets that hissed and smoked when they hit the metal floors. Janet, you still with us? Mac called out hopefully. Marcus, I'm experiencing significant system damage, but I'm still somewhat functional, came the AI's voice, now distorted and crackling with static. Current atmospheric conditions are, well, they're absolutely dreadful. I'm detecting sulfuric compounds, nitric acid, and what appears to be the station's attempt at creating a do-it-yourself hell. How encouraging. Can you give us a route to the medical bay? I'm afraid most of my sensor network is offline. However, I can tell you that the main corridors are flooded with acid rain, the secondary passages are blocked by debris, and the maintenance tunnels are actually. The maintenance tunnels might be your best bet. If you don't mind crawling through confined spaces while dying of radiation poisoning. Mac started pulling the stretcher, his makeshift harness already chafing his shoulders. Maintenance tunnels it is. At least I know those systems. The first mile wasn't so bad. The tunnels were narrow but familiar, and Mac's radiation detector had settled into a steady rhythm that sounded almost reassuring. Gorvek tried to keep up a conversation, but Mac could tell his friend was struggling. You know, Mac said, pausing to rest and check his tablet, when I signed up for this job, the recruiter mentioned challenging work environments. I'm pretty sure this falls under false advertising. Mac, about what I said earlier, about being in waste management. What about it? I wasn't entirely truthful. I'm actually the station's head of environmental safety. Mac stopped pulling the stretcher and turned to stare at his friend. You're what now? I was down in Section C7 because I'd been investigating safety violations. Someone's been cutting corners on maintenance schedules, and I was trying to document it when the solar flare hit. So you're telling me that you're not actually the guy who processes alien waste, but the guy who's supposed to make sure the station doesn't kill us all? That's an accurate summary, yes. Mac was quiet for a moment, then started laughing. It wasn't a happy laugh, it was the kind of laugh that comes right before a complete mental breakdown. That's just perfect. My best friend is an environmental safety inspector, and I'm the guy who's been ignoring half the maintenance requests because I was too busy fixing toilets. We're like a cosmic comedy duo. They reached the end of the maintenance tunnel and Mac peered out into the main corridor. The scene was like something from a nightmare. Acid rain was falling steadily from the ceiling, pooling on the floor and eating through metal grating. The air shimmered with toxic fumes, and in the distance Mac could see the twisted remains of what used to be a decorative fountain. Okay, we need to cross about 50 feet of this to reach the next tunnel access, Mac said, pulling his makeshift mask tighter. The good news is, it's only 50 feet. The bad news is, it's basically raining death. Mac, maybe we should. Nope, we're doing this. Hold on, Gorv. Mac pulled the stretcher out into the corridor and immediately felt the acid rain starting to eat through his makeshift protection. The floor was slippery, and he had to be careful not to step in the deeper pools of acid that had collected in the low spots. Halfway across, they encountered their first major obstacle. A section of the corridor had lost artificial gravity, and debris floated in the air like the world's most dangerous snow globe. Mac had to navigate around chunks of metal and droplets of acid that hung suspended in the zero-G field. This is like the worst video game ever, Mac muttered, carefully pushing aside a floating piece of ceiling panel. And I can't even save my progress. The next section of their journey introduced them to the station's security systems, which had apparently decided that everything was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Mac first noticed the problem when a maintenance drone rounded the corner and immediately started shooting cleaning lasers at them. You have got to be kidding me, Mac said, ducking behind an overturned waste container. The cleaning robots are trying to kill us. It's not personal, Gorvek wheezed from his stretcher. The security systems are probably interpreting our presence as a contamination event. We're covered in acid and radiation to them. We're just another mess to clean up. That's oddly comforting in a completely terrifying way. Mac waited for the drone to pass, then made a run for the next section. Unfortunately, the station's security AI had apparently called in reinforcements. 3 more drones appeared, this time equipped with what looked like industrial-strength disinfectant sprayers. Okay, this is a problem, Mac said, pulling Gorvek behind a structural support beam. Those things are designed to sterilize entire sections of the station. If they hit us with that stuff, we'll be very clean corpses, Gorvek finished. Mac looked around desperately, his engineer's mind working on the problem. The drones were programmed to clean and sterilize, but they were also programmed to avoid damaging station infrastructure. If he could make them think that attacking him would damage something important. Gorv, I need you to start making noise, lots of noise. Sound like you're malfunctioning equipment. I'm a safety inspector, not a sound effects machine. You're a 6-armed purple slug who speaks 17 languages. Just pick one and start swearing creatively. Gorvek began making a series of electronic beeping and whirring sounds, mixed with what Mac assumed were some very colorful insults in his native tongue. The drones immediately stopped their advance and began communicating with each other in high-pitched electronic chirps. Mac used the distraction to rewire a nearby maintenance panel, creating a feedback loop that made the entire section's electronics start smoking and sparking. The drones, faced with what appeared to be a massive system failure, immediately switched to emergency repair mode and forgot all about cleaning up the 2 intruders. You know, Mac said, pulling Gorvek's stretcher past the now docile drones, I'm starting to think this station has some serious design flaws. Mac, there's something else you should know. The evacuation was rushed because someone in management knew about the maintenance problems. They were trying to cover up the safety violations by evacuating everyone before the solar flare hit. And they just left us here to die? They probably assumed anyone still on the station was already dead. It's not uncommon for corporations to write off a few casualties to avoid legal liability. Mac was quiet for a moment, processing this information. So we're not just trying to save your life. We're also the only witnesses to corporate negligence that probably killed people. That's an accurate assessment. Great, no pressure then. They reached the hydroponics bay, which had been transformed into something that looked like an alien jungle horror movie. The plants, exposed to radiation and toxic atmosphere, had begun mutating in ways that defied biology. Vines thick as Mac's arm writhed across the ceiling, and flowers that glowed with an unsettling light turned to track their movement. This is like that old movie, Mac said, carefully navigating around a plant that seemed to be breathing. You know, the one where the plants try to eat everyone. Except this is real, and I'm already dying, and I really don't have time for homicidal vegetables. Mac, your species' tendency to make jokes in life-threatening situations is both admirable and deeply concerning. It's either laugh or cry, Gorv, and crying uses up too much water. A vine suddenly lashed out at Mac, wrapping around his ankle. He stumbled, nearly dropping Gorvek's stretcher, and had to kick frantically to free himself. The vine retreated, but Mac could see more of them starting to move in their direction. Okay, new plan. We're going to run through this section really fast, and we're going to try not to think about what happens if those plants catch us. Hank, in your current condition. In my current condition, I'm dying anyway. Might as well die running. Mac broke into a sprint, pulling Gorvek behind him through the mutated jungle. Vines whipped at them from all directions, and flowers shot spores that made Mac's eyes water even through his makeshift mask. Something that looked like a cross between a tomato and a piranha plant snapped at his heels, and he could hear Gorvek making what sounded like prayers in his native language. They burst out of the hydroponics bay and into the next corridor, Mac's lungs burning and his vision starting to blur. The radiation detector on his belt was clicking so fast it sounded like static, and he could taste blood in his mouth. How much further? Mac asked, though he was afraid to hear the answer. About 6 miles, Gorvek said quietly. Mac, you need to know my species has a concept called honor debt. If you die trying to save me, I'll be bound by cultural law to spend the rest of my life trying to repay that debt to your family. Then you'd better make sure I don't die, because my family's going to want interest. Mac's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The radiation poisoning was starting to affect his nervous system, making his hands shake and his vision blur. Every few minutes he had to stop to cough up blood, and he could feel his strength ebbing away like water through a broken dam. Mac, please. Just leave me here. You still have time to reach the medical bay and get treatment for yourself. Gorv, we've been through this. I'm not leaving you behind. But you're dying. Nah. Yeah, well, that's not exactly news. I've been dying since the moment I was born. We all have. The only difference is that now I have a schedule. They'd reached the final stretch, a section of the station that had been completely flooded by acid rain. The water, if you could call it that, was knee-deep in the color of old copper. Mac's makeshift stretcher had finally disintegrated, leaving him to carry Gorvek directly. This is it, Mac said, lifting his friend as gently as he could. The medical bay is just on the other side of this section. All we have to do is walk through a few hundred yards of acid soup. Mac, that acid will eat through your boots in minutes. Your skin will start dissolving before we make it halfway. Then I guess I'd better walk fast. Mac stepped into the acid water and immediately felt it eating through his boots. The pain was incredible, like walking on broken glass that was also on fire. Every step sent waves of agony up his legs, but he kept moving, one foot in front of the other. Mac, stop. Please, this is insane. You know what's insane? Alien toilets. I've spent 3 years of my life fixing alien toilets, and not once has anyone said thank you, Mac, for making sure our waste disposal systems work properly. But here I am, carrying my best friend through acid rain. And you keep trying to talk me out of it. Mac's voice was getting slurred, and his steps were becoming unsteady. The acid had eaten through his boots completely, and he could feel it working on his socks and skin. But he kept moving, driven by something deeper than logic or self-preservation. Humans are weird, Gorv. We're probably the only species in the galaxy that would consider dying horribly to save a friend a reasonable life choice. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Mac, you're delirious. Maybe, but I'm also almost there. They reached the medical bay, and Mac's heart sank. The door was sealed and there was no power to the section. The emergency lighting was out, and the air was thick with smoke from burned-out circuits. No, Mac whispered, collapsing against the door with Gorvek still in his arms. No, we didn't come all this way for it to end like this. Mac, it's okay. You did everything you could. No, it's not okay. Nothing about this is okay. Mac's voice was raw with exhaustion and pain. I'm going to get this door open, and I'm going to save your life, and then I'm going to die with some dignity instead of collapsing in a puddle of my own blood. Mac set Gorvek down as gently as he could, then began examining the door's control panel. The circuits were fried, but the mechanical systems might still work. He pulled out his multi-tool and started working on the manual override. Mac, even if you get the door open, there's no power to the medical equipment. Then I'll fix the power. I'm a maintenance engineer, remember? This is what I do. Mac's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his tools, but he kept working. Blood from his mouth spattered the control panel, and his vision was starting to go dark around the edges. But he kept working, driven by pure stubborn refusal to give up. The door clicked open. Mac dragged Gorvek into the medical bay, then immediately set to work on the power systems. The main power was out, but fine. But the backup generators were still functional, they just weren't connected to the medical equipment, because some genius had decided that medical bays didn't need redundant power systems. Okay, Mac muttered, pulling apart a control panel with hands that could barely grip his tools. Emergency power to medical systems. Should be simple. Should be, why is everything spinning? Mac's vision was getting worse, and he could feel his coordination failing. But he kept working, rerouting power cables and bypassing damaged circuits. It was like trying to perform surgery while riding a roller coaster during an earthquake, but it was also exactly the kind of problem he'd been trained to solve. Mac, please, just rest. You've done enough. Haven't finished yet, Mac slurred, finally connecting the last cable. Medical bay online. Just need to. Mac collapsed, hitting the floor hard. The last thing he heard before consciousness faded was the sound of medical equipment coming online, followed by Gorvek's voice calling his name. Mac woke up several hours later to find himself in a medical bed, with various tubes and monitors attached to his body. His vision was clear, and the constant taste of blood in his mouth was gone. He felt surprisingly good, actually. "Mac, you're awake." Gorvek's voice came from the next bed over. His friend looked much better. His skin was back to its normal purple shade, and all 6 of his arms were moving properly. "How long was I out?" Mac asked, trying to sit up. "About 6 hours. The rescue ships arrived 3 hours ago. You've been unconscious for most of the treatment." "Treatment?" "Gorv, I was dying of radiation poisoning. There's no treatment for that level of exposure." Gorvek looked embarrassed, his eye stalks drooping. "Mac, there's something I need to tell you. My species, we have a unique biological trait. When we're extremely grateful or emotionally moved, we produce tears that contain powerful regenerative compounds." Mac stared at his friend. "You're telling me that you cried on me?" "It's not as simple as that. The compounds only work when they're produced in response to genuine, overwhelming gratitude. And Mac, what you did, carrying me 11 miles through acid rain while dying of radiation poisoning. I've never been more grateful to anyone in my life." "So your alien tears cured my radiation poisoning?" "The human body is remarkably adaptable. The regenerative compounds just gave your cells the tools they needed to repair themselves." Mac was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "That's either the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, or the weirdest. I'm honestly not sure which." "Mac, I also need to tell you something else. The rescue teams found evidence of the corporate cover-up. The safety violations, the rushed evacuation, the attempts to hide the maintenance problems, it's all going to come out. They'll probably want you to testify." "Great. I go from fixing toilets to being a whistleblower. My career path just keeps getting more interesting." Commander Phillips appeared in the doorway, looking remarkably uncomfortable. "Rodriguez, I need to speak with you." "Commander, how's the station?" "Completely destroyed. The solar flare fried most of the systems, and the acid rain ate through the infrastructure. It'll take years to rebuild." Phillips paused. "I also need to inform you that there's going to be a full investigation into the safety violations. The corporation's already trying to pin the blame on individual employees, but your actions have made that difficult." "How so?" "You saved the life of the station's head of environmental safety. He's got documentation on every safety violation, every ignored maintenance request, every corner that was cut to save money. The corporation can't make him disappear now that he's a hero." Mac looked over at Gorvek, who was trying to look innocent despite having 6 arms. "You planned this, didn't you?" "I didn't plan to nearly die in a solar flare, but I may have hoped that if I survived, I'd be able to expose the safety violations without being quietly transferred to a waste management position on some outer rim mining asteroid." "So you actually were in waste management?" "Only after I started asking too many questions about safety protocols. Corporate reassignment is a wonderful tool for silencing whistleblowers." Phillips cleared his throat. "Rodriguez, I've been authorized to offer you a position as head of maintenance on the new station. Significantly better pay, full authority over safety protocols, and a staff of 20 engineers." Mac was quiet for a moment, then started laughing. 6 months ago, I was fixing alien toilets and wondering if I'd made a mistake with my career. Now I'm being offered the job of my dreams because I was too stubborn to let my friend die." "Mac," Gorvek said seriously, "humans have a saying, no good deed goes unpunished. But I think your species might have it backwards. Sometimes good deeds are the only things that get rewarded." "Yeah, well, your species cries healing tears. I think we're both pretty weird." 3 months later, Max stood in the same spot where he'd started his journey, looking at the construction of the new Prometheus VIII. This time he was wearing a supervisor's uniform instead of maintenance coveralls, and he had a team of engineers working under him instead of working alone. Janet, how are the new safety protocols working out? He asked the station's rebuilt AI. Wonderfully, Marcus. I haven't had to report a single safety violation in weeks. It's almost boring. Boring is good. Boring means no one's dying of radiation poisoning or being chased by homicidal cleaning robots. Gorvek approached, wearing the uniform of a station commander. Mac, I wanted to thank you again for. Gorv, if you thank me one more time, I'm going to start charging you rent for the emotional space you're taking up in my head. Fair enough. But I do have something for you. Gorvek handed Mac a small plaque. It's from the Galactic Safety Council. The Marcus Rodriguez Award for Outstanding Heroism in Maintenance Engineering. Mac read the plaque, then looked at his friend. They named an award after me? It's specifically for maintenance personnel who go above and beyond the call of duty to save lives. The first recipient was a human who crawled through a reactor core to prevent a meltdown. The second was a human who repaired a life support system while hanging upside down in a zero-G environment. The third was a human who... Let me guess. All the recipients are human? Every single one. Your species has a remarkable talent for turning routine maintenance into acts of heroism. Mac hung the plaque on his office wall, right next to his old maintenance schedule. You know, Gorv, I used to think that fixing toilets was the most important job on the station. Turns out I was right, I just didn't understand why. Oh, no. Because someone has to keep the basic systems running. Someone has to make sure the air is breathable and the water is clean and the waste disposal works properly. And when everything goes wrong, someone has to be stubborn enough to fix it, even when it's impossible. Even when it means walking 11 miles through acid rain? Mac grinned. Especially then. Besides, it's not like I had anywhere else to be. Outside the viewport, construction crews continued building the new station, and Mac could see the first transport ships arriving with new personnel. Soon, Prometheus VII would be operational, and Mac would go back to fixing broken systems and solving impossible problems. The difference was that now he knew why it mattered. Not because the work was glamorous or well-paid or appreciated, but because sometimes the most important things in the universe depended on someone being willing to do their job, no matter what. And if that someone happened to be a human who was too stupid to know when something was impossible, well, that was just a bonus. Janet, what's first on tomorrow's schedule? Mac asked. Routine maintenance on the new atmospheric processors, Marcus. And Mac, try not to save anyone's life this time. I'm still updating my protocols from the last incident. Mac laughed, looking out at the stars. No promises, Janet. No promises. After all, he was human. And humans, as it turned out, were remarkably good at turning routine maintenance into acts of heroism. It wasn't a bug in their programming, it was a feature. Even if it did mean walking 11 miles through acid rain to save a friend's life.